This podcast provides information to help esports professionals identify and approach legal problems. This podcast is intended for informational purposes only. Legal information is not the same as legal advice, which is an application of law to a party's specific set of circumstances.
You should not and are not authorized to use this podcast as a source of legal advice. And the information in this podcast does not create an attorney-client relationship between the Law of Esports podcast, any of the lawyers or affiliates of the podcast, and any consumer of this podcast.
Welcome to the Law of Esports podcast, the number one podcast that discusses legal issues as they apply to the world of esports. My name is Jake Hicks, and I'm an attorney that represents teams, leagues, and organizations.
And my name is Nefi Lopez, and I'm an attorney that represents players, personalities, and streamers.
And we have a great episode today for our third episode overall, but we have to say that there's been a big gap if you look at our Spotify history and our YouTube history between episodes 1 and 2 and episode 3. And there's a good reason for that. We're in Texas. Yeah. We're in Houston.
And we ran quite a few things have happened over the last, I'd say, month, beginning with a freeze. I don't know if you guys remember. It was not a good time.
Yeah, so we had a winter storm that froze everything. So a lot of us didn't have power or water. Nefi still has a hole in his ceiling from a leak from the freeze. Then, as it happens, I got COVID. I'm fine, but it definitely knocked me out for a couple of days, and then I had to quarantine for 2 weeks.
A couple days. You were out for a little while.
I was out for like a week, yeah. So that was tough. And then also, we are not podcasters by trade. We are full-time attorneys, and we had several cases jump off between our mutual dockets that kind of took over while negotiating the freeze, COVID, all these other things. Yeah. So thank you for tuning back into the Law of Esports podcast. It is the number one esports podcast to discuss legal issues in esports, but also that's why it took so long.
Yeah. And we're trying to be more consistent with our episodes. Previously we tried to do an episode a week. Life happens, and more important than life, work happens. And, we obviously want to provide you guys, the listeners and the viewers, with the most up-to-date information. But let's be honest, we're not making any money off of this right now until sometimes our jobs come up. I know Jake has got a pretty big case where a lot of things are popping off. And just a few minutes ago, he was getting a lot of filings. I've got a couple of trials scheduled within the next couple of weeks. So it gets a little hard for us to be able to come out with episodes. But as long as you stay tuned, we will continue to release these episodes. We will continue to give you guys the best tips and advice and try to keep you up to date on the legal issues that are happening every day in the ever-evolving world of esports.
Yeah, it's a crazy day whenever a client calls you and says that they may have lost $1 billion. And so I may or may not have received one of those calls in the recent past. But speaking of losing money, that brings us to today's episode, which is interference in the world of professional esports by third parties and how that can be encouraged by online sports betting, gambling. Yeah. And we've seen that over the past, since online sports betting has gotten bigger and bigger, and really since the esports has gotten a bigger following, all of the troubles of traditional sports will kind of follow esports as it grows.
Right.
And one of those is sports betting, or even kind of other types of games of chance that can apply to sports betting, like a March Madness style bracket. Is that really betting? Probably not. And you're going to talk about that later.
Yeah.
But it still can create an incentive for somebody to interfere with a match, maybe match fixing, maybe just some kid trying to disrupt a connection so he has a better chance at winning money.
Yeah.
And there's been some notable incidents of that recently.
Yeah.
So thankfully, I'm part of the sports group at the law firm I'm at, and I had an article published on the issue in the Esports Observer talking about interference with the CDL, the Call of Duty League's tournament, their 2020 championship tournament.
Yeah.
And really in that article, I discuss...
But before we get into that, though, one of the things that's important to note is that there's always been interference in the past with people trying to interfere in order to make money or in order to cause a particular team to lose. But and something that brought up in your article that's unique to the esports world and really to just sports in general is COVID. And so what we're going to talk about is is we're going to add how COVID plays a special element, a unique element, right? Because prior to COVID, if you had LAN, we really didn't have a lot of these issues. But now that COVID plays a role, we're dealing with very, very novel, unique legal issues with interference.
Right. And so that's what the article kind of discusses.
Right.
Is with COVID, we're facing all these issues. Imagine a sport that takes place entirely online, that's broadcast to the world, that hadn't really happened before, at least at the highest levels of competition. Right. And so with COVID, the Call of Duty tournament, by way of example, was played online. And usually those tournaments are on LAN. They have an air-gapped connection, where every PlayStation was plugged into each other. And now I guess it'll be every PC is all on a closed loop system. And that means that some person who has money on the line can't go in and disrupt a player's connection. Well, what happened in the Call of Duty League tournament is there was a match where one of the players' connection got interrupted, and it was at the precise time where, according to the CDL rules at the time, the match wouldn't be restarted. And so that had a pretty significant impact on the course of that match. And there was a couple players that voiced their opinion as to why that may have happened. And the CDL, before this championship tournament, had a March Madness style bracket where if you were correct in the way you set up your bracket, you won $100,000. And that can create an incentive for people to start interfering with tournament play by the time you get into that much money, right? $100,000. I'm sure we'll see $1 million bracket challenge sometime in the future, whether it's with Call of Duty or Fortnite, or some esports somewhere. And so the challenge is, if you're a tournament organizer, how do you prevent that? But also, if you're an individual and you commit some type of this interference, if you attack a connection or you enter into a game when you're not supposed to be there, and delay the game, all these ways of interfering, what can really happen and how could it possibly be prevented, or how can the issue be addressed? And we've seen some other incidents, even with CSGO, April 5th. Yeah. We saw an issue come out with CSGO.
Yeah, and it's a bit of an interesting and sort of novel issue because it takes away a big element that is typically there, right? Whenever you're dealing with match fixing, which is what has been happening lately with CSGO, and it's become big enough to where the FBI is getting involved because we're dealing with gambling, we're dealing with a lot of money coming from all over the world. And a lot of it coming from the United States. The FBI is getting involved in investigating, but it sort of creates a unique issue because, whenever, let's say you're fixing games, right? Like March Madness that we recently dealt with in basketball.
And match fixing just means that you're a player and you're doing something to control the outcome of the game.
Right.
Most of the time, that means that you're performing very poorly so that you lose and create the expected outcome for whoever is betting on that game.
Right.
And that's generally the form that match fixing takes.
Right. And that was what was happening in CSGO. There had been various reports of some major players, not necessarily organizations, although we're going to find out in the coming weeks. But there were players where, illicit groups, right? It could, we don't know the nature of who is, whether it's an individual, whether it's a particular organized group, like some type of mafia. I don't know whether or not this is something that they're particularly interested in. But one of the things is that there are these organizations or people reaching out to individual players and saying, hey, if you throw this game, we're going to pay you X amount of dollars, right? It's increasingly difficult to do that in person because you have to go and you have to offer, you have to bribe, you have to figure out how you're going to get cash from your bank to their bank or give them a briefcase full of cash. It makes it seemingly easier whenever you're doing that in online betting, right? You get an email from somebody or you get a phone call from somebody saying, hey, if you throw the game or you have internet issues or whatever, something happens to where the other team gets an advantage and you guys lose, we'll make sure that you'll get X amount of dollars in your bank account by this date. It's very easy. It takes away that human element. You're literally communicating, and it's easier because you're dealing with not professional athletes, but younger players.
Right. And just to be clear on the CSGO match fixing allegations, Ian Smith from the Esports Integrity Commission, the head lawyer over there, was recently on a podcast just a week ago or less, 5 days ago.
Yeah.
5 or 6 days ago. And he said that there's allegations of certain players in CSGO that are throwing games. And they are doing it at the requests of outside parties. And we don't really know why. Obviously, when the FBI gets involved, you may think it's some sort of organized crime issue. But it could also be something as simple as, look, we are esports team A. We're part of the Esports Brotherhood. We're already not going to make it to semifinals. So let's help out this team. We'll throw this game. They get into semifinals. And then, maybe they'll return the favor in the future.
Yeah.
And that could also be match fixing. So it doesn't have to be always a nefarious organized crime issue. It can literally be trying to honor the Esports Brotherhood and help out your fellow esports player.
Right.
But you still create a significant issue that's being investigated by the federal government.
Yeah, and all that, although it's speculation on our part because we don't know for certain, right? Ian Smith for sure has a more in-depth knowledge of what's going on because he's working together alongside the FBI. And it's funny because he specifically, the words that he uses is players are being bribed by outside betting syndicates, meaning, like let's say you have FaZe or Optic or one of these large organizations that have a record of being great teams going against a lesser known organization. Most people will bet on the team that they think are going to win, right? Based on history, based on performance, and betting syndicates will make money if the sort of the underdog wins. And so, along with people and individuals, there could also be organizations that are, financially vested in the outcome could be reaching out to players in order to get them to, throw a game using, small, like one of the things that was going on in the Call of Duty League was that they were basically they were specifically targeting connections of players and were getting around the rules. Like I think in Call of Duty League, correct me if I'm wrong at any point, when you have a team of 5, losing one player at some point during the game doesn't automatically cause the game to reset, but they continue playing. They would trigger those small rules that would inhibit a team from performing at its top capacity, and cause them to lose a player, but the match continue and ultimately lose a game.
Right. And that was certainly one of the issues in the Call of Duty League tournament and it's interesting because the CDL rules are still confidential. And we've talked about that in the cheating episode.
Yeah.
But we do have an idea of what they say, and they've become public to a degree in terms of when you can restart a match because those issues have happened and they've had to exercise those rules on stream.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it was in Hardpoint, it's the first team to 250 points. And I think if one team is past 150 points, or if the total is at 200 points between both teams, you don't restart. Now, this year, they are on PC, and they do have a pause feature, supposedly. We've never seen that pause feature used. And I mentioned that in my Esports Observer article, that supposedly there's a pause feature. We've never seen it used. Esports players have been vocal about including the pause feature because that can also work as a deterrent, right? If you're trying to interfere with the match, and they can just pause the game where it is.
Stop everything, yeah.
Yeah, and CSGO has a pause feature. Valorant now has a pause feature. And the fact that Call of Duty supposedly has it, it's in the game code, I guess, but they aren't using it.
And choose not to use it.
Yeah, it's kind of frustrating.
Yeah.
But, I think Crimsix had a tweet talking about, hey, wasn't there supposed to be a pause feature?
Yeah, and it just wasn't used.
It's just not used.
I feel like if there was a time to use it, it would be in these instances that we saw.
Yeah, and these issues are going to stay relevant because, I think Valorant has an in-person event in Reykjavik, Iceland, supposedly coming up, but you never know with the COVID numbers. Johanna Ferries, the commissioner of the CDL, came out and said they're going to be online for the foreseeable future for the 2021 season.
Right.
They're constantly reevaluating for LAN, but until we see more LAN tournaments happening, if Valorant's Reykjavik event goes well, then maybe teams can have a LAN tournament in countries where COVID's well under control. And hopefully everyone's vaccinated by the fall, but who knows? And so until that time, a lot of tournaments are going to be played online, and you'll have these risks. And even when tournaments return, you're going to have some issues with match fixing and issues that have reared their heads that filter through and continue even when we do get back on LAN.
Right. Now, I'm sure you guys are sitting there and saying, okay, why does this matter? Why should I care? Right? The FBI is getting involved. Although, contrary to popular belief, you would think that the FBI would get involved in just anything. The truth of the matter is that not every single crime that's committed, it rises to the level to where the FBI would get involved. And so it's important to note that whenever you see the FBI getting involved, that has some massive, massive implications on sort of how the government, right, sees esports, the nature of the crime being committed. In other words, they don't consider these minor crimes, right? Up until recently, believe it or not, the FBI created what they call the illegal sports betting branch, or what's the word?
So until recently, they did not have a special investigative unit for sports betting.
Right.
And recently, was it 2015, 2016?
Around
they
2015,
created a special sports betting investigative unit that centers on sports betting. Not just gambling, not RICO, racketeering influence crypto organizations.
Right.
It's sports betting.
Right.
And that's what an FBI investigative unit is doing. And they're new. They're green. The Esports Integrity Commission, Ian Smith, is helping them with an investigation into CSGO right now. But they are going to get stronger. They're going to get
and they're going to
experience.
get better. They're going to start figuring out. I mean, because think about it. Prior to esports, which in my opinion it's been around for a while, but it hasn't grown to this level until literally probably within the last 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
I mean, we're sports betting before. You're talking about online gambling, right? You're going onto an online gambling website. You're dealing cards. You're dealing with roulette. Online gambling also. We're talking about horse racing, sports. I mean, this is such a new issue, right? That the FBI is now getting involved with these types. Because I mean, gambling, if think about it, if you can make money on it, people are going to figure out ways to make more money, whether they do it legally or illegally.
Yeah, and actually, an article that I was working on that ended up being scrapped was an application to sell futures commodities based on the outcome of sports games. So ErisX, the people that do cryptocurrency and they sell futures on Bitcoin, they made an application to the Commodities Futures Trading Commission asking them if they could sell futures based on the outcome of sports games to help these sports betting houses hedge their bets because they were getting inordinate amounts of bets on certain teams because they're only allowed in certain states.
Yeah.
So those states' teams were getting a lot of bets on them. And so even at the highest levels of the most sophisticated finance industries, sports betting is starting to filter in.
Right.
At the same time, at the very lowest levels of people sitting at home trying to keep themselves entertained, it's at that level as well.
Yeah.
And I think whenever you are looking at the particular issues that the esports world is facing, if we start that approach from kind of a top-down look, we have to look at what leagues and team organizers and tournament organizers, the issues they face in third-party interference.
Yeah.
Right. And so if you do have a March Madness style bracket for a tournament, if you do permit some sort of betting, whether it's with cash or with skins, whatever the case is, you have to be aware that other people may try and attack the connections of your players, try and attack the connection of your stream, something. And so one of the issues I brought up in my article briefly, and I brought it up in the cheating episode, was the fact that in esports, as opposed to any other real sports organization, a particular entity owns the game you're playing. So does NBA own the sport of basketball? No, but nobody else does either.
Right.
Same thing in the NFL. NFL doesn't own the game of football. You can go out and put 22 guys on the field and have them throw a lemon-shaped ball and put it on TV. You can call it whatever you want to call it, XFL or whatever.
Yeah.
And you can have that be played as long as you set up your own league.
Right. Without getting sued by the NFL. Because they don't own the rights to the game.
They don't own the rights to the game. Same thing with every sport, right? That's not true with esports because you have a game publisher. And that game publisher has certain rights because they created that game. And you talked about it last time in the cheating episode. They have copyright.
Yeah.
They
intellectual property rights.
Intellectual property rights. They have end user agreements that you guys have probably clicked through a million times. But you can't interfere with other people's connections that you've
Right.
have also bought the game if you have the game yourself. And so that's the publisher. The problem that leagues and organizations have is that they don't have those same rights. And so if you guys recall, months and months ago, people were selling Warzone cheats, and we talked about this in the last episode.
Talked about this in the cheating episode.
And Activision Blizzard could cease and desist saying you can't make cheats anymore. And that would kind of inhibit the problem a little bit. It didn't completely stop it.
You know what? And one of the articles that I saw, I think Blizzard was sending private investigator to the houses of people that were creating cheat codes as also sort of maybe intimidation is not the good word, but to really, I mean, these guys have a vested interest in preventing cheating because it has broader implications whenever somebody's cheating. It's not just like, oh, you're going to win and it's fun. We're dealing with money, gambling. These corporations are really taking action to prevent cheaters.
Yeah, but if you're a league, then what do, right? Someone comes in and they interfere with one of your players' connections at a time when the game can't be restarted. And again, we don't know if that's exactly what happened, but there have been players, like I said, Octane went on YouTube and said, if you have a March Madness style bracket where people can win $100,000, you have to be prepared for someone to try and interfere with the game so they can have a better chance of winning that prize money.
Right.
And so one of the ways that I write about for the Esports Observer is tortious interference. It's a very legal
term. Yeah.
If you're a league organizer, you might have heard that before from some of your lawyers. And all that means, so a tort is just a harm that you cause, right? So if I touch you offensively or harmfully, that's a tort. That's called assault, right? By the same token, if you interfere with someone's contract, that you're not breaching their contract, but you're causing them to breach. You're causing them a harm. That's tortious interference. And that's a cause of action that can be used against people that are interfering with professional league play.
Right.
And that will come in the form of a cease and desist letter. That can come in the form of a lawsuit. That can come in the form of an injunction from using your computer.
Right. An injunction is basically you're asking the court to force somebody to do or not do somebody, just as a little background note as to what an injunction is.
Yeah, and so tortious interference is a cause of action that you can that can be used by leagues to stop that, because they can't use copyright infringement. Mm-hmm. They can't use end user breaches or breaches of end user agreements. And so that's one thing they can use. But more importantly, when it comes to the individuals that are causing this third party interference, the government can get involved.
Right. And so what Jake was talking about just a few moments ago, we're talking about sort of civil avenues of seeking redress, right? Seeking something to be done whenever somebody's interfering.
Right. How leagues can protect themselves.
Right. And a lot of it, again, this is sort of logical reasoning from two lawyers that deal with these issues. Because and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think that any particular organization has taken these actions versus any particular individual. We're looking at it in a way of, okay, this is what you can do, right? If you're watching this and you're a league organizer, or you're looking to start your own org, or you own an org and you're like, somebody interfered, what can I do? This is just an idea, right? Yeah. Tortious interference is a legal theory that you could potentially pursue. And I'm sure if you go out and you talk to a lawyer and you decide to hire a lawyer, they're likely to tell you the same thing. And it's a good way in order for you to be able to seek legal action against somebody for interfering with you and your I guess your business plan with a March Madness bracket, because at the end of the day, the reason why you do that is to make money. But aside from the civil stuff, what something that plays a major role is criminal implication for individuals, right? Assuming that whatever you're doing rises to the level of enters a jurisdiction of like the FBI or any other investigative units, you have to be very careful as to how what you do, inadvertently in order to mess with a particular event that is happening, so that way you're not committing or breaking any type of law or committing any felonies. And this, again, the reason why this is novel is because gambling is playing a much larger and larger role in the esports world that we're seeing every single day.
It's getting more and more massive, and gambling's legal in 7 states now.
Exactly, it's becoming increasingly legal throughout states as to how you can online gamble. Because again, all of this, because it's all online, it's not like you go into Lake Charles or you go into Las Vegas and you know are playing blackjack and winning money. This is you're viewing something and you're betting on the outcome of it. And so there are a lot of laws that play a role, and you have to be very careful. And if you're even considering it, if you're a player and you've been approached by an organization and they offer you $500, you're like, well, it's not a lot of money, so they can't play that big of a role. But that's where you're wrong. I'm sure if you guys listen to any other podcasts out there, I know there's a handful that we listen to. I'm not going to promote any of them for free, but they themselves have invested, and you'll hear it because they talk about it all the time in betting apps involving esports specifically, right? They've become publicly traded, and they're always, you know, promoting it because it's become such a large thing. But
yeah, and you know, we're not against gambling, because it's a great way for a sport to grow. Yeah, and it's a fun activity
and it's fun,
to do.
Yeah.
And you know, we're not against gambling, but anytime that gambling becomes a part that it exists in the world of a sport, you have risks that pop up that you have to be able to address or mitigate. Right. And that's part of what we're talking about today is how to address and mitigate some of those risks.
Right. And so whenever an esport involves gambling, right, it involves money, you sort of enter a new realm of laws that apply to that particular esport or that particular event that's happening, right? Believe it or not, and just to name a few anti-gambling statutes in the United States, some of the major ones, and you guys can look this up if you really want to find out. There's one called the Illegal Gambling Business under the Organized Crime Control Act, right? The OCCA, which is basically a federal offense based on violating state anti-gambling laws. If you're, and this is not even you getting involved, but if your state prohibits online gambling and you decide to hedge a bet on an esports because you're watching it on Twitch or you're watching it on whatever, you have to be very careful that your state, the state that you live in, doesn't prohibit or doesn't make it illegal for you to online gamble, right? I know every year whenever you guys are playing fantasy football and you're betting 10, 15, 20, $50 with you and your friends, it's not saying it's not illegal, but it's very difficult to get caught.
Right.
If you're placing bets on a website, right, and most websites are linked to where if you're part of a certain state, they won't allow you to place a bet. But if you're, you know, on a new website that doesn't have those securities to protect you, the consumer, you could get in a lot of trouble for doing that. There's a few other ones like we were talking about earlier, the RICO, the Racketeering, Influence, and Corrupt Organizations Act. If you, as an individual, organization, as a player, as a viewer, take any action, whether on purpose or not, because it's your mental state, right? Your purpose doesn't really matter. If you do anything to affect the outcome of a particular event or whatever's going on, for the purpose of you know, defrauding or winning or taking money or damaging somebody else, their property or their money, whatever you want to call it, you are in fact part of a corrupt organization, or you're taking an action that is considered a felony, right? This is a federal crime that you can go to jail and potentially go pay, restitution, and it costs you a lot of money, because, you know, it involves gambling.
Right.
And I don't know if you know, you've seen how Call of Duty has played a role over the years, but as it continues to grow, people will be able to allow gambling in really all aspects of the game, whether it's in how many kills somebody's going to get, what somebody's KD ratio is going to be, what team is going to get.
I think you're going to get a variety of kind of gambling avenues and different bets you can make. And as a matter of fact, in the sports betting, online betting futures application to the CFTC, they were trying to get futures based on 3 types of bets. And that was, the line, the spread, and the over-under for football. And they were trying to get futures sold on those 3 bets, which is kind of nuts. And I think as esports gets bigger, we might not see the traditional types of sports bets. We might not see a Valorant game where someone bets the line, the spread, and the over-under. But we may see, total team KD.
Right.
Or, total matches, whatever the case is. I think we are going to see the winner-loser bets.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The line. I think we're going to see those bets. but I think we'll also see more unique bets to esports.
Yeah.
Which will be interesting. And then we're going to see things that aren't really bets. Like a March Madness bracket where you don't really pay any money. It's just a contest.
Right.
You know, I mean, that's not really gambling if you don't put money in, but it's a contest where you can win money and it can create an incentive for third-party interference. And so when we look at, particularly with individuals, the types of punishment they can face comes in the form of RICO. It comes in the form of a variety of different anti-gambling or gambling restrictive laws. But you also have, like I said, tortious interference. You have civil remedies from the league. And then you also have things like the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. If you're impacting other people's connections, if you're impacting other streams, other business through the internet, Computer Fraud and Abuse Act can be used in a variety of ways. And it can be used civilly as well to get money damages. And then we also have the big dogs. We have the FBI investigative unit on sports betting. And so if you are an individual planning on causing some type of interference, whether it's a prank or not, and you know there's money on the line there,
you could potentially be inadvertently committing a federal crime.
And so, let's talk about some ways to, I guess, prevent some of the risks involved with in the environment we're in, which is that gambling's in esports now. And it might not be someone putting a bet with a gambling house, but it could be a contest like the CDL's bracket. And I bet they have the same thing this next year. And so I think the best way is to have a LAN tournament where everything's kind of air gapped. And
kind of like a bubble with the NBA and the NFL. Really, the NBA is a big example of how a bubble works. I mean, I think they had very, very, a nominal amount of what we call incidents where people actually got sick in that bubble.
And so if you have a LAN, that makes it a lot easier. Because, as leagues, you only have so many tools. Really, tortious interference is one of the few tools you have against third-party interference, someone that's not involved in the game. When it comes to match fixing, the league can levy heavy penalties. And in that CSGO issue that you were talking about earlier, the CSGO match fixing allegations, because we don't know what's actually happened. They suspended 35 players in Australia. For a similar match fixing issue.
From anywhere from a year to 5 years.
To 5 years. Yeah, so the league can come down on people involved in the league. When it's a third party, when it's some kid out there, that's a little bit harder. And a LAN prevents those third parties from causing issues.
From interfering,
from interfering, which is nice because the publishers aren't always involved. And yes, I know that Activision Blizzard owns the Call of Duty League. I get it. And I know that Riot owns Valorant. They can own that league as well. But they don't always get involved because they're busy making the free bundles for Warzone. While not putting in an
packages.
Skin packages. While not putting in an anti-cheat. They're selling skin packages. They have bigger fish to fry. And so the leagues are really kind of on their own. And then, so they can initiate a cease and desist process with tortious interference. But, if you're an individual, what can you do to avoid some of these problems? Let's say you want to enjoy, you want to put a bet on an esports game, or you want to join a March Madness contest. Right? What are you supposed to do?
So, especially for you as an individual or you as a player, you have to take into consideration, right? A lot of the time during our podcast, because we're both U.S. based attorneys, we've focused on the U.S. based law. But it's important to note that a lot of the players, especially for people playing from home, are coming from lots of different countries. And so you have to take into consideration that not just U.S. laws, right? If you're let's say playing from South Korea, or you're playing in the UK, or you're playing in Germany, or you're playing in whatever country you're playing on, and you're playing with Americans, right? Like, for example, this whole thing with CSGO, we're dealing with international teams. If whatever action you're taking violates any law, whether it's a U.S. law or a UK-based law, and we kind of talked a little bit about U.S. laws, but even the UK, look at the Gambling Act. If you're in the UK, back in 2005, they had started enacting gambling acts and have sort of propounded and added to that Gambling Act and have made it grow. Every single country has its own independent list of laws. I'm not saying go out there and read the laws, but it's as simple as being very careful and making sure that if you're going to gamble, if you're going to try to do anything to interfere, know that because gambling is potentially involved, this isn't just, you're not at a GameStop, right, the night before a game release, and what you're going to win is a free copy of, Halo 5 or Halo 3 or Gears of War. People are potentially losing thousands to millions of dollars in a simple action such as doxing one of the players because their IP address, or tweeting, or giving information, or whatever it is. You could potentially be committing a very severe federal or international crime involving betting. So you just have to be absolutely careful. And, just if somebody approaches you for a bribe, regardless of how much money it seems, 100,000, 20,000. And I imagine, because we're dealing with a small, $100,000 bracket. I mean, chances are they're probably offering $5,000, $10,000 to these individual players to throw game. Jail time doesn't, no matter how much money you have, first of all, you're not going to get it, right? Because if you cheat, and Jake and I were talking about this, I don't know if you remember during the Super Bowl, that streaker, the guy that bet, I don't know, $5,000 or $50,000, there was going to be a streaker during the NFL, and he ended up being the streaker himself. I don't know if you guys followed up with that story, but not only did he get caught, but he lost all the money he could have won, which would have been like $500,000 or some crazy like that.
They didn't pay out the bet at all.
Yeah, nobody got paid their bet, and he lost his initial investment, right? And so the same thing for you if you're betting, right? Let's say you get caught, which chances are there's a very high possibility you will. Now that with the FBI, everybody's getting a little more sophisticated. Not only are you going to lose the money that you've invested, you're not going to win. You're going to affect everybody else's outcome, and you're going to go to jail. And so you have to be absolutely careful. I mean, this isn't a small time anymore. We're dealing with money, a lot of it.
Yeah, and I think one of the risks in esports and gambling is that with esports, as opposed to really any other form of entertainment, it's so much more interactive. That's one of the best parts about esports. It's so awesome that you can watch one of your favorite players in a tournament and then go watch their stream, chat at them and interact with your favorite players. And people see it as such an interactive medium and an interactive form of entertainment. But when you have money on the line, when there's gambling and stuff, maybe having such an interactive esport poses additional risks. Right. And I think it does. Right. And I think it's, doing something like tweeting some guy a screenshot of someone else's tactics or something from a different stream. Stuff like that, if you have money on the line, changes a lot. Yeah. And it's no longer like a funny prank or just trying to help out your favorite player. Yeah. It can become much more serious. Yeah. Thankfully, I think we're going to see some return to LAN. I hope so. I hope we see some return to LAN. I know in May, Valorant is doing a LAN in Reykjavik. Hopefully that goes well. Yeah. But even if it doesn't eliminate all these risks, right? You still have the match fixing risks that ESIC is investigating now. And if you're a team, or if you're an organization or a team, you kind of have to police that as well. Like we talked about in our cheating episode, you really have to manage the influence on your players. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the hard parts about match fixing that's really tough, especially when there's allegations, is that to prove match fixing is pretty hard. And so if you see an investigation into match fixing, it's probably going to be pretty invasive. Yeah. They're going to ask for a lot of practice footage, a lot of recorded streams, because anyone can have a bad game. Mm-hmm. Ian Smith on the podcast said, Tiger Woods can miss a 3-foot putt. It's not that weird. Formal can miss a shot in Call of Duty as a main AR. It happens. It exists. Yeah. And how do you know when someone's throwing and someone's not? Yeah. And so the investigation could be pretty invasive, and they can ask for a lot of information. They can interview the team president, the CEO. They can interview the janitor. I mean, they can, especially if the government gets involved, they can have a pretty expansive investigation.
And it's going to cost a lot of money for everybody involved.
Teams are welcome to pay me to handle the investigation for them and defend them. And I will be, happy with that money. Yeah. But if you can avoid spending it, that's the best. Yeah. And so just like we talked about with cheating, when it comes to like match fixing, those risks aren't going to go away with LAN. they may have started and gotten worse in COVID. And so if that's out there in the environment, that probably won't go away just because we're back on land.
Right.
These third-party interference issues probably will, I hope. But match fixing and stuff is rough, and everyone has to know that there are major risks associated with it. Esports is no longer a game, a little environment that you can live in and do whatever you want.
Yeah.
That no longer exists. Now there's billions of dollars involved, and there's some real risk involved when it comes to gambling, match fixing, and these other issues that we talked about.
Yeah. And so, and I mean, it's just, you have to tread lightly, right? Obviously there's organized crime. And whenever you say organized crime, it's sort of, you think of the mafia. It's really not even that complicated.
Yeah. It could be just organized people organizing.
Literally.
5 dudes getting together, talking about how they're going to influence the outcome of a game.
Yeah. Saying, hey, let's throw $1,000 towards, Scump to have a bad game. Not saying it ever would. And I don't think he ever would do that. I don't think he ever
would, but he's also one of the more wealthy players, or one of the more well-paid players.
Right. And not every player has that luxury, right? You have a lot of these guys that are nobodies, and I don't mean that in an offensive way, but that aren't well known, that are, literally getting paid maybe their travel fees to go to these tournaments, or get a couple $1,000 to build a computer. The need is there, right? Because you want to turn this into a career, but you have to be extremely careful not to let it influence you. It's taken so serious. Another thing we were talking about is recently, not to piggyback and to talk too much about cheating, but Tfue had won a tournament with his team, and he had used some third-party software to mess with like the coloring or the shading, the brightness, and the brightness. And they literally kicked him from, they stripped away his win. I think it was a $25,000 pot or something like that. And, that is how serious these organizations are taking these tournaments.
Yeah. And it only gets worse when there's money involved from outside organizations. And it's tough because you do have esports players like Pristine and Arcides in Call of Duty. And I know I talk about Call of Duty a lot because I'm a major Call of Duty fan, but, Pristine and Arcides went from Dairy Queen to the main stage. Literally, that was their progression. And so it's hard not to imagine some of these guys being influenced. But in terms of third-party interference, we talked about ways for leagues to handle that. Yeah, we talked about the risk that those third-party interferers can face. We talked about CS:GO match fixing allegations and the fact that there's a new FBI investigative task unit investigating CS:GO now, which is kind of a cool thing for esports. It sucks that it's happening, but esports is in the big leagues now. Part of the big boys. So just a lot of things to be aware of in esports, and a lot of things that are on the new horizons. And I think the big takeaway is that esports is growing nonstop. It's going to face challenges and growing pains that all the other sports face, and they had 100 years to deal with it. Esports really had, like 15, 20 years to deal with it. At most. And so all these issues are coming down the pipe very, very quickly. You have to stay up to date and realize what's happening in the environment around you and understand legal issues as they apply to esports.
Which, and as time progresses, I know we with podcasts kind of hard to interact with viewers and listeners. If for whatever reason you guys think that, hey, this is going to be the next big issue, please feel free to drop in the comments what you think we should talk about next. We've got quite a few things in the pipeline, and so we're going to talk about discussing from even the basics of contracts to we may or may not get into a little bit of some criminal law involving streamers reaching out to their fans. You guys have to be very careful about that. If you guys have any tips or any comments, or hey, your audio sounds like crap, as you guys can tell today, we've got a new station where we're recording this from.
Nefi talks so loud, it's crazy.
I do, I know, I tend to yell,
but
let us know in the comments
or tweet at us.
Or tweet at us, follow us at the Law of Esports Podcast, I think is what our handle is on Twitter. Or follow Jake at what's your tag, or your tag? That's such a gamer. Your Twitter handle.
Oh God,
it's like
it's Jake Hicks Law.
Jake Hicks Law, and mine is Nefi Neff. Feel free to drop a follow, send us a message. tweet at us. Really the best thing. We're going to try to make our social media grow. Let us know. Okay. We're here to provide the cutting edge updates and information, and attorneys' take on how our wonderful world of esports is evolving over the years. And, we want to stay up to date and stay in touch with the viewers and listeners.
And also, if you guys don't mind, go to the Esports Observer, type in my name, click on my article on Call of Duty League. The clicks help a lot and helps us get more stuff published in the future. And I think it's a really cool medium to check out. Also, I think it's a good publication in general.
Yeah, absolutely.
So check that out. And in the meantime, thank you for listening. We'll see you guys next time.
Yeah. Listen to us on any place.
Spotify, Apple Podcasts.
Yeah, all of it. All right. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.